Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about all matters relating to estate planning, trust and estate probate administration, both from the standpoint of your own matters, your own estate planning and administration, but also from the standpoint of professionals like my guest Kiah and I, who both are involved helping people with all of these different tasks, if you will, this and the larger situation. And so don't want to spend a lot of time on introductions, but want to get directly to my guest. So if you saw any of the social media posts, you know that Kiah started out at having a family office, and he's going to talk about that. And then he, as his clients got older, he extended his practice and is now also a professional trustee. And he's seeing a generational shift in his practice that is really, I haven't come across anyone in my neck of the trust and probate administration business, quite like Kiah. And so that's why wanted to have him on the show. We've been friends now for a while. We met through an organization called the Independent Trustees Alliance. And Kiah lives in my old hometown, Santa Barbara, California, where he gets to enjoy life all year round. And I live down here in Los Angeles. So Kiah, thanks for coming on the show. Welcome.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kevin. Great to see you as always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Happy to be a part of this.
Terrific. So let's jump right in. By telling us, how did you get involved in creating a family office? First of all, what is a family office, and how did you get involved in starting yours up?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll start with explaining what a family office is. A family office is often created by a single family of significant wealth when they decide they want to have all of the services in-house. Maybe have significant enough means that the time that's required to give the attention to their investments, to perhaps their businesses, their entities, really the structure of their holistic life is best accomplished by creating your own office, almost like a company to manage your own wealth. Rather than having attorneys at these firms, CPAs at these firms, and other professionals out there, a family office is created to hold that all in one space. Typically, that office also manages the investments and is like a investment advisor for private assets, real estate, investment portfolios, all those things in-house. Sometimes it's a way to consolidate expenses and sometimes save money in that capacity. The next step of a family office to consider is often a multi-family office. This is an office that's serving more than one family. Again, often these fall under SEC regulation because they're managing money, providing investment advice and services, and charging AUM. My model is, as I like to describe it succinctly, an impact-focused multi-family office with no investments under management. So we have no AUM, no assets under management that we charge for. It's different because we're outside of SEC regulation, and we are working with the investment advisors that our families already have. I like to say no one gets fired to work with us because we're not replacing the attorneys, we're not replacing the CPAs, we're not replacing the investment advisors. We really like it when there's existing relationships in place that we can become a part of the family's life to coordinate, oversee, quarterback, if you will, and align all of the services and goals that the families have. I'll back up to how I got started.
So before you get into that, when you talk about assets under management and wealth advisors, are you referring to solely financial assets, or because to my mind that's where the SEC would get involved, right? You'd have to have a series 61.
65 is the registered
65,
investment
yeah.
advisory.
Or do you include with that other non-financial asset classes like real estate, like business interests that the SEC has no cognizance over, but potentially could require, for example, a
Yeah.
real estate license or something like that?
Yeah, so I think of the family office as having a spectrum. So there's on one end of the spectrum, you have your investment advisors that are under SEC regulation. They're providing investment advice. Often, let's say they have discretion and they're making trades.
Mhm.
And that might be the individual who hires an investment advisor at any large brokerage firm to manage their money, and they have discretion over it.
Mhm.
And then as you start to move away, you move into, on the other side of the spectrum is the full family office, where they're managing your money, they're managing all your real estate assets, every single thing you have, maybe overseeing family businesses, running payroll for household employees, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
There are investment advisors that step into the family office space, and often that the clarity of what those services are, and they start to refer to themselves as a family office, is typically we do bill pay. So a family of significant means who has assets with them under management, they might have a bookkeeping staff, and they're able to handle personal bill pay for families.
Mhm.
They may then end up having someone who's able to coordinate, oversee, and communicate with their property managers if they have real estate assets.
Mhm.
And so there's kind of this building towards what eventually may be a large multifamily office, or on the other end of the spectrum, that single family office where it's all in-house for that family.
Mhm.
I think a lot of investment advisors will provide the bookkeeping services. They'll still charge an assets under management fee, a percentage of what they're managing. And then they may add kind of bookkeeping services, maybe some coordination with CPAs. Maybe at some point they'll have a CPA on staff who does file tax returns.
Mhm.
So we kind of move towards the family office space of how involved we are in families' lives and how much we're willing to be involved in, but we stay away from the investment advisory services.
Okay.
If that makes sense. It's one that's a little harder for people to sometimes wrap their mind around if they're coming from an asset under management world.
Mhm.
The reason for this structure is I never wanted to have a conflict of interest of where assets were managed and where they should be invested. Um, I'm not building a team of people that would propose to be the right solution for every client in terms of where their money is managed.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't want the engagement with us and the services and the fees to be based on having their money with us, because often the relationships they already have are the best ones for them,
Mhm.
or finding another investment advisor or additional investment advisors for them is not one that I want to have a conflict of interest of how we charge or how we're being paid. I always want the family to have the best investment advisory services that they can have.
Right. And to clarify, when you're
Yeah.
using the term investment advisory services, you're
Yeah.
talking about any type of asset, whether it's financial, real estate, whatever. So,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, I am. Now, we do engage more deeply at the real estate management level, because that's actually where my career started in real estate investment.
Mhm.
I do have my real estate license. So we do fulfill for some clients that kind of property manager, asset manager in the real estate space.
Mhm.
Um, we don't do the brokerage work, so we're not doing the listings or the sales. We're working with the advisor or the uh, brokers that they already have,
Mhm.
but we have the expertise and knowledge to be involved in that. Some clients who have very large, sophisticated tenants, we do work with them, but we're working with facilities managers, not a residential location who's got a plumbing issue.
Right.
So we do, that's an area of comfort and experience for me and some other members of our team. So we do work with clients who have significant real estate assets, and often have accumulated their wealth in real estate and have very little involvement in an investment portfolio as part of their overall picture of wealth.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And so you alluded in answering that question that that's how you got into. So
Yeah.
talk to us now about
Yeah.
how your career, kind of where it started and how you got into the family office
Yeah.
part of it.
So as I was finishing college, and I went to college here in Santa Barbara, Westmont College, small liberal arts school.
Mhm.
I was a business economics major, added a Spanish major halfway through as I did 2 semesters abroad in Mexico, and was interested in real estate. I had some family members that were residential brokers in California and had spent a couple summers working with them, kind of understanding the process of buying, selling, escrow in real estate. And so I had looked at real estate brokerage and in the commercial space, and also investment when I was coming out of college, and was hired by 2 gentlemen who had been real estate developers and investors for, at the time, about 40 years. And significant amount of experience. They had built, bought, repurchased properties over their career. And I was initially hired to be a property manager for the in-house assets they had. They had a book of investors, and they syndicated deals most of the time. Very, very good returns over the years with a very loyal investor base. It was not hard for them to raise anywhere from 3 to 10 million within a month to close real estate deals. And so I was hired as the property manager to come in, manage all the properties that they had. And over the time there, moved from from coordinating the property management work with contractors and leasing to taking over all the accounting. Bookkeeper left. I said, hey, I can fill in until we hire someone. Never hired anyone. So I took over all the QuickBooks files. Ended up getting my real estate license, ended up getting my CFP as a certified financial planner while I was there, because I wanted to be able to have more conversations in-house before we called the attorney, called the accountants, called the trust companies and managed IRAs and different things for clients, and didn't realize I was building essentially a dual family office, we'll call it, for these 2 partners. And during that time, they were slowing down as they got older and the volume of deals they were doing. I had really become their trusted person, and they said, hey, we're updating our estate plans. We'd love to put you in here as a successor trustee in case anything happens to us. You know where everything is. And that was that first, oh yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Still in my mindset, thinking of it as, I'm an employee of yours. I know where everything is. This is a great way to be additionally helpful for you. And as they got older, they came to me and said, Kiah, you've got a skill set and an interest in areas that are greater than just the syndication work we're doing. We're slowing down in that space. What if long-term we became clients and you did this work for more families? And it was an incredible opportunity given their reputation and their experience to also kind of switch from employee to consultant. And with the reputation that they had and their network I had built through working for them, it wasn't a slow start to initially have some people go, well, can you do this for me too? And this? And then that built the multifamily office, which built the, hey, you're my person. Could I put you in the estate plan? So I had ended up accumulating quite a few estates where I was named, but not yet acting as trustee, realizing I had now built this trustee future, and then preparing for that transition, because as attorneys were putting me into the estate plan for the client, they then would ask, well, would you do this for another family of similar assets? So I was starting to get introduced as a successor trustee, and realizing, okay, this transition from working with families while they're alive to being the trustee when they're gone actually is really seamless in getting to know their life and providing that peace of mind to continue what I'm aware of along the way. So that's how we've morphed into Impact Family Office, becoming a conduit for the trustee services that I provide and other members on my team. When I launched Impact Family Office, it was initially called Impact First Financial. And the idea was I thought that by staying away from the family office name, people wouldn't think I was managing money. But I think just having financial in the name, Impact First Financial, people assume that. And I realized I need to own what we're doing, how I describe us anyway. So there's less confusion there, but I just still have to identify, because it's the unique part. We don't manage money. This isn't an AUM business. We're working with families now so we can take care of them when they're gone.
So I've heard the term used, assets under administration, as opposed to assets under management. And I know for my practice, That's
Yeah.
how I tend to refer to them, because, like you,
Yeah.
I work on a team concept where if there's financial assets, I'll either work with the existing wealth advisor or bring one in if one is needed. I have a number, and this may be different than your experience, but I seem to have attracted people who were self-managing their portfolio of securities, et cetera, even
Yeah.
though their primary business was real estate. And so
Yeah.
the management of their, stocks and bonds and such
Yeah.
was usually rather, poor, right? And so bringing in a wealth advisor who knows, what she's doing has really
Yeah.
been, a boon for, for the heirs of these people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's interesting. I have some clients that their professional experience and expertise was investment management,
hmm,
but they've entered the stage of life where they actually need to give that up.
mhm,
For some, it's I don't want to devote the time and attention that I used to devote to this,
mhm,
and therefore finding the right investment advisor so that I can step back from that role. Might be, the creation of additional time to travel and be with
sure,
family and that type of thing.
mhm,
We do have a few where it's actually the conversation that's difficult around their mental capacity and the
right,
facilities of going, maybe you shouldn't be managing things anymore. And
right,
having those conversations with dignity and respect is something that, is really important, and helping them realize maybe you shouldn't be doing this anymore. And then there's a transition to an outside party.
mhm,
Um, we have a lot of clients who have built their wealth, as I mentioned, through real estate. And then
mhm,
there's a conversation at, a later stage of life when they're in their 70s, 80s, where they have massive capital gains if they were to sell and they
mhm,
feel stuck, right?
right,
And I guess I'll pass away. There'll be a step up in basis. There'll be a large, component of my estate that's going to be taxable, unless we start talking about trusts and gifting while you're alive, and maybe charitable remainder trusts come into play in
mhm,
that conversation if they have a large charitable component already in their estate plan. Um, so we get a lot of the real estate, a number of family businesses as well,
mhm,
and the investment portfolios. Sometimes you see that same stuck in place with capital gains over a long
mhm,
period of time.
mhm,
Um, we like to step in and help to think through what's their actual goal, and then what can be shifted along the way, while they're still here,
right,
and what they want to accomplish while they're alive, and then make sure the things are in place to help accomplish that when they're gone.
right.
Yeah.
Now, how do you work with the dynamic of the succeeding generations
Yeah.
who, at this point may not have any, legal
Sure.
interest, in all this wealth, but they're going to be inheriting some or all of it,
Mhm.
and it may not just be the immediate succeeding generation. They're, for someone who's, in his 80s,
Yeah.
there's likely to already be children, grandchildren. The grandchildren are probably not little kids.
Nope.
They could be 20, in their 20s as well, right? So how do you handle that dynamic?
Yeah. It's a great question. I've, in the last year, had a number of trusts set up by parents for their, we'll say, kids. They're my age or older often, and sometimes there's often two things that are prompting it. There's the gift while they're alive, moving it out of their estate into an irrevocable trust.
Hmm.
But that's sometimes prompted by we've kind of been the piggy bank. We've been it's like we're still giving our kids allowance.
Hmm.
We want to shift this to an irrevocable trust. Kiah, you're the trustee, and shift the relational component of it as well. We want next gen to start um, engaging in professional advisors. We want them to have a relationship with you as a trustee, with an investment advisor that you've hired to manage this trust, to budget and have these budgeting conversations with them about the trust and distributions. And we want to sit back and be the parent, not the piggy bank, right? They
Right.
want to kind of shift that conversation out from, hey, our kids would like this or this, and here's some money for them, and allow that to shift, because someday, as you said, there will be a transition in most cases of much more assets. And so This just happened a number of months ago with new clients who created a trust for each of their kids,
Mm-hmm.
funded the trusts with real estate. I then sold the real estate,
Mm.
hired an investment advisor, invested, have sat down with each of the next gen and said, hey, here's the trust documents. Let's go through them. Let me help you understand what a trust is, what the documents say around distributions, what this is for. Also understand that there is a potential that these will be funded in greater quantities during your lifetime, your parents' lifetime, or after they're gone. This trust was structured, and this is specific. These trusts were structured in a way that the parents could make continued gifts into them along the way. And taking a different approach to each beneficiary. One of them has a great thriving career, has significant income themselves. Do we want to distribute monthly or quarterly? Do you want me to take into consideration some tax that you'll have on these and kind of withhold and give you a big chunk when you file your taxes? Versus another one that might be, no, I manage my money really well. Give me the distribution, quarterly versus monthly, and just give me the whole thing. I'm good at saving it myself, and I always pay my taxes. So getting to know the personalities and then structuring the relationship and the distributions and the engagement with them according to the personality is something that we really enjoy doing. And it's a good preparation while the parents are alive for them to start to engage in this professional relationship that would have to be there if something suddenly happened to the parents.
Right.
But it's an easier transition to say, hey, we're going to ease into this rather than, hey, I'm so sorry you're mourning, your parents are gone, and there's a whole new structure that's now in place in your life.
Right. So one of the things I've noticed in my practice, surprisingly, really, is that in many cases, the next generation doesn't really know exactly what their parents have, and they're surprised that this pot of this the size of the pot of money that exists. Number one, and number two, they're involved in something completely unrelated to what their parents did, and so they don't have the background to deal with all the hundreds or thousands of details that handling this wealth comes with. So you mentioned a kind of in passing a little bit the educational process. So how do you make that work? Because at times I think they feel like they're drinking from a fire hose, which is really a daunting thing for someone.
So. The conversation I had actually last week with one of these new trust beneficiaries was, really starting from the place of allowing them to know that not understanding this at all is okay. And there's no expectation that they understand even what a trust is. Hey, here's this trust document. It's quite long. It's very detailed. It's not a business. It's not, it's not a business entity. I don't own it. You don't own it. Your parents don't really own it. But I am in charge of it for your benefit. And helping them, understand that it's okay to not understand the structure. And in that process of helping them know that all questions are on the table from them and that transparency is primary to this relationship, especially starting for them to go, are you someone I can trust, right? You have to build trust immediately. And it takes time. Immediately focus on building trust, even though it's not immediate trust, but it's immediately start focusing on that, right? And so I always tell them, look, my role as trustee, I boil it down to these two things. Don't be sneaky and don't be stupid. That's what I have to, as a trustee. Don't be sneaky, don't be stupid. So don't be sneaky, right? Everything's transparent. I am open and honest and transparent with you. You will have access to everything that happens in this trust, at minimum annually, but along the way, making sure that, there's nothing sneaky going on.
Right.
And don't be stupid, right? I have to know how to do my job, do it competently, do it capably for them. And helping them build that, relational component where they're going, oh, I trust what you say.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I trust that you know what you're doing, especially with the experience you have, right? You have a lot of experience to pull from when you're sharing with a client. I've done this, and I've done this.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, I tell their parents, if we're meeting and they're considering me to be a successor trustee in their estate or trustee for a irrevocable trust they're creating, I say, look, if you don't feel like you can trust me, this isn't going to be a great relationship.
Right.
Because questioning what each other's saying all the time is just not going to be helpful for us.
Right.
And if I'm not a personality that you think is going to fit really well with next gen, that's okay. Like, you should find someone that they're going to be really comfortable with because they trust what they're saying. Obviously, make sure they're competent, make sure they're not stupid and not sneaky when you're hiring someone. But you want the beneficiary to have, at least from the first case, the perception and the ability to trust them as a trustworthy person, have a good relationship with them. Because otherwise, they may feel like they have to micromanage the trustee as a beneficiary. And that's really hard, especially if they don't know the role of the trustee or know their role as a beneficiary. So sitting down with them and just starting from a blank slate and saying, hey, here's this trust. Might be kind of confusing. That's okay if you don't understand it. The purpose of it is to do X, Y, Z for you. And my job is to make sure that that's done well. Now, then as I get to know the level of maybe education or experience that the beneficiary has about understanding investment assets, understanding legal documents and trusts and those types of things, we can get into more specifics. But sometimes the stage of life that the beneficiary is in doesn't allow them to engage a lot, right? I have 4 young kids. To sit down with a beneficiary who's maybe in a similar stage of life, either they're working with a career that's growing and they don't have time to, really, really engage, or they're not working and they're the domestic partner or household engineer and they're running the show with all the kids, and they just say, hey, I love this. I trust you. This is going to be a huge benefit in my life. Just send me the distribution once a quarter, And I would then in that case say, well, we need to at least meet a few times a year. I want to make sure that you're getting this, and I can walk you through things and the duties that I have to make sure that things are clear and transparent. So I really look at who the beneficiary is, what interest they have in involvement. And I have some really young ones. I have some really young beneficiaries who have expressed interest, and they will grow into a greater understanding of the trust. They might be a minor as a beneficiary initially, and so I'm actually sharing with their parents. But then, hey, if you want to jump on a call and walk through how this is invested, happy to share that with you. I have a number of beneficiaries in college. One is going a very artistic kind of MFA fine arts route. Doesn't care as much about how it's invested, but cares very much in having conversations around how this can support their career path, right? In the creative space. Another one that's going through finance and business at, in college and going, I really want to understand this because I want to be able to get into this as a career or do this on the side. Or personal. So I have always stressed that the relationship between the trustee and the beneficiary needs to be thought of as a good combo and a good pair. I'm sure your experience as well, right? When you feel like you connect well with the beneficiary, it's so much easier. Trust established. They understand. They trust you. You trust them too, because that's another piece. If you don't, I've had some, and I have a few, where the requests come with always a filter for me to say, is that really what you're asking for or really what you need? And so building that trust for them to be able to communicate clearly back is really important too.
Yeah. So kind of flipping this over a little bit now, I could imagine that there are times when perhaps the relationship between the grantors of a trust and their children beneficiaries are not so good, and so the idea, right, of having mom and dad's guy,
Yeah.
handling my stuff
Yeah.
is not particularly welcome.
Yeah.
So, how do you handle those situations?
Yep. Yep. Um, I'll use an example that has happened a number of times over the years where it's been surprise your trustee and the family doesn't know who I am.
Ah,
And I've had two I have two that are similar and different. First one was surprise to the family. Kai is the trustee. It was a sudden passing of a husband. Um, but the wife said, look, I trusted who my husband's advisors were. He always chose them well. I'm going to start with, assuming the same about you. And we've built a great relationship.
mhm,
And I'm the trustee of the marital trust and a number of things. And in that space, it's, hey, I'm your trustee, but I don't ever want you to feel like, you've been left in a cage that I manage for the rest of your life, right? That's the worst way to think about, especially a surviving spouse, who still has a long life ahead of her. And so finding that appropriate amount of involvement is really important. In the other ones where it's surprise your trustee, family always thought that they were trustees, have fun, kind of had that call from the attorney
right.
where it's like, oh, I had a call with that individual. I didn't even know they put me in the trust. Those are the most difficult ones because I haven't been able to establish a relationship of trust already.
Mhm,
And I put as much time as I can immediately into introducing myself, helping them understand that I'm at least competent and experienced in this space. It wasn't mom or dad's friend from school, friend from church, college buddy, right? Those types of things.
mhm,
Um, but it doesn't mean it goes well. And one of the things that I'm learning is upfront, some of the difficult questions that come out later are things to ask up front. Sometimes it's questions around, is there any addiction in the family?
mhm,
Right? Are any of the beneficiaries going to have erratic behavior that I need to maybe have a little more context to? Are there mental health issues?
mhm,
Right? Maybe there's a bipolar, maybe there's manic depressant where they're going to be on, very communicative and then gone and disengaged for a long period of time.
right.
And asking some of those questions up front, trying to say, what is the landscape of expectation here around communication back and forth with them, is really helpful to set kind of those initial like filters of going, okay, I'm receiving this email that sounds really, aggressive, or they clearly don't trust anything I'm doing with this massive host of questions.
Mhm,
And having some of those, maybe are there mental health issues, are there addiction issues, any of those things that would be helpful to understand
mhm,
relationally when you start can help give a little more empathy or sympathy in that communication up front.
mhm,
And then understanding maybe their own experience professionally in understanding some of this stuff. I've sent a financial statement to someone, and after they were asking lots and lots of questions. How's this being spent? What's this? And I send them all of the details, literally hundreds of pages of all the details. And in my mind, it was, look, I'm being 100% transparent with you. And then in the next meeting, they're asking some of the same questions. And I go, well, did you look at what I sent you? And I realized, no, they didn't.
mhm,
And it was too much. It was overwhelming.
mhm, mhm.
And so they actually didn't look at any of it. and and they actually thought that maybe I was hiding something by sending so much information.
Mm,
So those conversations around what is their level of comfort and how much communication and how much detail do they want, and then trying to get at the root, maybe concerns about the estate.
mhm,
I'm sure you've dealt, with the questions around personal property. What did they see as valuable?
mhm.
What is actually valuable? And when they say, oh yeah, just sell everything, get rid of it, and then later go, well, what about this and what about this, right? And so um, each one of them is different,
Mhm,
and kind of, and from the start trying to establish the mode of communication, the volume, the sophistication,
mhm,
not in an insulting way, but the sophistication they have with some of the reporting and communication you're going to provide. And
mhm,
then the other one is really for for me, often explaining, look, I'm going to provide you a lot of communication in email. I know you're going to want a phone call all the time, but I'm still going to put it in an email first, and then we can have a follow-up, because I do have a duty to report and explain and show that I've communicated this to you, maybe to you and your attorney, or to you and the estate's attorney. And if you're not responding in email and want calls instead, I may need to transcribe those calls, so there's a record of that. And that came up recently, actually asking someone, I said, if you have an issue with maybe processing my emails, right? Maybe dyslexia, right? Maybe they're not willing to admit that a phone call is the easiest way to do it. And then adapting to those situations. But as trustees, we have a duty to report, right? And to make sure we're communicating, to them and keeping them up to date on things. And then that balance of how much time we spend on that versus how much we are supposed to and how much they think is sufficient is always the tricky piece.
Now, how do you deal with a situation where, let's say, one spouse is the beneficiary, or one party is the beneficiary, I should say, and that party is married, but the spouse is not a beneficiary. The spouse is the spouse of the beneficiary, right? Again, that's a dynamic that I've seen, and sometimes I've even seen it where the beneficiary, it really doesn't have any kind of financial sophistication, but the spouse does, and the beneficiary has always relied on the spouse to handle those kind of things, right? So now you've got sort of this, I don't want to call it a third party because it's not really, but legally it is, right? So how do you deal with that situation?
So kind of maybe clarifying, if I'm to become a trustee for, let's say, a survivor spouse.
I'm thinking more like a child, maybe.
Okay.
The beneficiary is a child, right? And the child is the beneficiary. The child's spouse is not a legal beneficiary, right? But that child's spouse could indeed be the more financially sophisticated of the two, or may be financially sophisticated, right? And yet they have no legal role vis-a-vis the trust, right? So how do you deal with that?
So the beneficiary does have the right to bring anyone to the meeting that they want to, right? So if I call the beneficiary and say, hey, I'd love to review the investment performance and distributions and maybe the plan for next year, and they say, well, can my spouse come? They're helpful in helping me understand this. I would say yes, as long as you are requesting that. They say, hey, I'd like my accountant to come, my best friend to come, right? There'd probably be few cases in which I'd say, you might want to reconsider that. But I've explained to some people when I've given them the trust, I said, this is your document now. You can take pictures and post it on your social media all you want. You own this document now. I wouldn't recommend that, but you can tell anyone and everyone that you have this trust and the details of it. I can't, legally stop you from that. So if you have, a particular person you want to come, and I've had this where it is a child beneficiary who's brought their parent, even if they're legally an adult, right? Early 20s, maybe in college. I'm thinking of one specifically where father passed away, had kids from different marriages, right? Wasn't married to either of the mothers at the time of his passing. And so, kids in their early 20s who are in college, asking if their mom, the ex-spouse, can come. And in those experiences, it's been, it's actually really helpful to have that spouse kind of be the ex-spouse, the mother of the beneficiary, to kind of be a bit of the holder of knowledge in that phase. My hope would be that over time, they grow into understanding the trust, and I've developed a relationship specifically with them. I'm always very careful in understanding the relationship and the interest maybe from an unrelated party who's sitting in on those meetings. But the reality is I could have the meeting without the mother. She could be sitting outside in the in the foyer out here, and I could have the meeting with the child, and they walk out and hand the mom everything I just gave them. So there's no point in having that just for show. Yes, questioning a little bit of what's the unrelated party's interest, and are they helpful in the scenario?
Mm-hmm.
I have had a situation where I've told the beneficiary, I don't think your spouse is beneficial to our meetings, right? And that spouse is not a related party, and the trust does not benefit them. It does tangentially via the distributions to community property.
Right.
But maybe their personality or their questions are ones that seem more self-serving. I always have to have that radar, because our job is also to look out for the beneficiary's interest.
Right.
And just because someone's married in a relationship doesn't mean the other person's always in their best interest. And we have to be suspicious and careful of that too.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
So one of the hardest learned lessons I know for that business lessons for me was that sometimes there is a point at which I have to fire a client.
Yeah.
Right. Because it seems like this sort of works on the Pareto principle. 80% of your time goes to servicing the 20% of your clients who are just so unreasonable, so difficult, et cetera, right? And so what you find that you can't really focus on the people who really deserve your attention. So I'm curious, have you ever gotten to the point where you felt that you had to resign or withdraw as trustee, and how did you handle that? Because I think, especially for younger people getting into this business, and I was young when I started my first real estate company. I was in my mid 20s, and I remember those hungry years, right? I was not you're gonna drag the business out of my hands, right? But then as I got a little bit older, I realized that that I would have been much smarter if earlier in my career I had come to terms with that particular issue. So I'm curious what your experience is in that respect.
I had a client years ago who was family office space, right? I wasn't yet acting in a trustee role. And he had come to me saying, look, we have a small estate. My wife stands to inherit quite a bit, but we have some, rental properties, small real estate portfolio. I really want you to, kind of step into managing all this for us. And this was one of those questions around trust, right? I meet with him and his wife and say, great, you want us to step into managing this project. And then the wife would never give us the contractor's phone number, or would have all the billing still go to her and then forward it to us. And there was a time where there was a mutual connection with her mother, who she was going to inherit a significant amount of wealth. This is Santa Barbara. Everything's 1 degree, 2 degrees separation.
Right.
And I mentioned, oh, so-and-so knows so-and-so that, that I know. And the immediate response was, well, why is that relevant? Why is that important for you to tell me that? So, well, it's not, but we have mutual connections. And I saw that start to snowball into a bit more of a distrusting relationships. And I remember having lunch with the husband and saying, look, I'm sending you bills for time that's not accomplishing anything. I'm spinning my wheels here. I can't step into the role that you've asked us to do. Your wife is not handing things off, which was one of your goals, to create more time by us taking over for the two of you. And until she has the capacity to trust us to handle this, I just can't. I don't feel good about sending you a bill for the time that I'm trying to follow up to take on things. And love to work with you if we can ever work that out. But I'm going to need to step out of this until you sort that out. And so that was one of the first clients I let go years ago in the family office space. I am right now actually talking with an attorney about an estate that we're in administration, where the attorney's the special trustee, able to make a couple calls at the end of the administration. And one of those is around deciding that the subtrust created, allowing the beneficiary to become the trustee of their own trust rather than continue as trustee. And that conversation is particular to the relationship, the personalities involved. And that might actually be, it'd be the same as me saying, hey, I'm gonna resign from this role, and whoever's behind me, or I'm gonna appoint and resign. The attorney instead could say, hey, I'm gonna exercise this clause and just let them be the trustee of those trusts. So that attorney and I are in conversation around whether the involvement as trustee is worth the time that will be dedicated to a fair amount of frustration. And that's a hard one for me, because I'm put in place by the settler to look out for the beneficiary.
Right.
And if that beneficiary, now it's not necessarily the case here, but if that beneficiary is going to be self-destructive in becoming their own trustee, I would have a really hard time, even though that provision's there, agreeing to that role, to step out of that role for their benefit. Now, that might just be me taking it too far, but I'm thinking about what the settler really wanted for them.
Right.
And that's a conversation that's in process. And as we reach the end of the administration, the attorney and I can make a decision on that. He ultimately can make the decision, but we can have more conversation about that. And that might be the best role. I have a lot of sub-trusts that are created that I'm the trustee that continues for their lifetime or longer. But that's not always necessarily the case. And maybe stepping out of that role is just the best for both parties. So it's hard when it's best for me and not for them, right? When my fiduciary duty is to fulfill the trust and the settler's wishes in that space. So, that's a hard one to know, with each circumstance being a little different based on the trust and the beneficiary.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you, it occurs to me. I have a friend, excuse me, who, because we have the real estate background, we can probably somewhat appreciate this. He talks about handling matters in real estate time, which is, do it now. The best time to have done it was an hour ago, but and the next best time is now, kind of thing, right? It's it happens fast. And one of the things I found is in trust administration, estate administration, oftentimes that's actually not the case, because there's multiple people involved, and making sure everybody even though I may have the sole legal authority to make the decision, making sure everybody understands what's going on, is on board, etc. Creating that consensus takes time. And so while there may be a circumstance where acting with, absolute alacrity, real estate time is important, I think a lot of our work is actually saying, let's take it a step at a time. Let's understand where we're going, and bring the whole team along, right? Rather than just, the efficiencies of getting it done. And that takes a certain, personality, maybe. I'm wondering what your thoughts are along those lines.
My initial thought is that's always very frustrating for beneficiaries, but very important for trustees. And when you think about the role that, when we hire an attorney to represent the estate in our administration process, those attorneys, their job is to identify all the risks for us. And then often we have to decide what level of risk we're willing to accept in the decisions we make. Is that beneficiary going to be angry? Yes. Is it the right decision? Yes. Are they angry enough that they're going to take us to court over it? And if I stand in front of the judge, do I feel comfortable with the decision and can defend it? Right. That's what we always have to be thinking about. I agree with you entirely on the time, right? It's different than a real estate, right? Time kills deals. That was drilled into my head by a real estate mentor years ago. And I have a book back here by an author, Frank Partnoy. It's called Wait, The Art and Science of Delay. I loved reading that book many years ago, because the idea is the longer you wait or delay under the right circumstances, the more information you have to make the most informed decision.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than making the decision today because you can, if in a month from now the decision needs to be made, there may be things that develop over that month. And so the collection of data, the collection of opinions from multiple beneficiaries is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to articulate when I reach out to beneficiaries, I would really like your preference and opinion on this decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not what do you want me to do? It's not what's your vote? It's what is your preference and opinion or any additional information that I need
Mm-hmm.
to make a decision.
Right.
And I've definitely, over the course of an administration, thought this is going to happen at the beginning. And over time, that's changed. And now this is what's going to happen at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, like the mechanism for us as trustees is we have a notice of proposed action, right? We have a NOPA that we can go, sometimes it's a notice of proposed no action, but we're saying, hey, beneficiaries, I am going to make this decision, and I'd like you all to sign off on it.
Mm-hmm.
I've used this most in the scenario when there's a large family business, right? An overly concentrated asset in the estate.
Right.
And the family doesn't want it to be sold, right? And it's when we have this duty to diversify, and in a large family asset that might be risky or just as concentration wise is huge, using this notice of proposed action to get everyone to agree and sign off.
Mm-hmm.
But waiting and seeing what happens is really important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've had trustee or settlers in their estate plan really envision their business going on forever. Oh, we've got great managers. They're going to run it. They're going to produce profits and they'll get an incentive along the way. But a transition as significant as a founder passing really makes people reevaluate their role.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what comes to surface is, I loved the founder. I hated the business. Now's a good time for me to leave, right?
Right.
There might be a loyalty that existed in there, and now the key manager who might have had an incentive to stay, it's not good enough. Or the business that the settler thought was less reliant on them really was very reliant on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're going through this process of, well, we need to petition the court for this change, right? It dictates that we need to do this, but circumstances have changed. We need an approval on this. And those take time.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I've had some beneficiaries frustrated with a claim that, kept getting delayed in court, entirely out of my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the judge rules in the estate's favor, now there's still a 60-day appeal time. Right. And the attorneys are saying, well, nope, you got to wait till the appeals time is done and make sure that nothing was filed. And the beneficiaries are going, well, we won, keep moving. And so there really is that balance of doing our job slowly, methodically, and intelligently and intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't always jive with the beneficiaries and sometimes the assets, right? That's right. The thing you really have to be careful of, and being prudent along the way, right? We don't have the ability to predict the market or know what the market's going to do. And over the course of administration, things can happen. And so it's what reasonable steps are we taking to protect, diversify, ensure the trust along the way that we have to be really, really clear about.
Okay. So we're actually coming up on almost an hour, but there's one more question I want to ask you, and that is, you mentioned this before, and I don't know that I've ever had this conversation with any other guest, but you alluded to the moral aspect of being a professional trustee or of being a fiduciary. So I look at a fiduciary, there's a lot of ethical obligations, right? Whether it's imposed by the law itself or whether it's imposed by proper practice, that sort of thing. But you mentioned something that's really more of a moral issue, I think, and that is fidelity to the settlers of a trust. And so this is me sort of putting on my chaplain hat for a moment, which I find a very useful thing to do in our world. How do you maybe expanding on this issue of fidelity to the grantor, or even more broadly, how do you see the moral side
Yeah.
of what we do. And how do you deal with that? Because one of the things I found, for example, is I can't really talk to the lawyers about that because
Yeah.
it's not their field. Nothing against them. And
Yep.
I don't mean this as a slam on lawyers, because
No, no, no.
I find most lawyers in our space to be, good, credible people.
Yeah.
But there is that component there. So I'm curious to know how you
Mm.
deal with it.
So from the the ethical side, right? We have this duty to the trust is what has hired us ultimately. We have a duty to perform what the trust is written for us to do. And I've had trusts that I become the trustee of that I wish had been written differently, or I wish the settler had done something different.
Mhm.
And then we have this duty to be impartial to the beneficiaries, right? Especially, and that's sometimes, with different personalities and different demands and all those things, being really clear about that. So yes, there's an ethical side of this, right? We can't have a conflict of interest. We really have to, make sure we're disclosing and providing information and all of those components that are under the professional code and all the duties that we have as trustees. The moral side of it, I love digging into understanding the wishes of the grantors, settlers as well. And I do this in our, with any client that we're talking about in the family business or in the family office. But I think about it too as beneficiaries. And I articulate it this way. My goal is that the wealth is helpful, not hurtful, tool, not a crutch, and it's never a weapon. And usually I'm having that conversation with the grantors and the settlers in designing their estate plan. And so I get a lot of the initial, referral is an attorney saying, hey, I have a client who's updating their estate plan. They want to meet you. I recommend an independent trustee. They come in. And sometimes they go, well, here's our trust. Can you read it and tell us what it does? And I go, well, no, let's start over with, what do you want it to do? And then I'll tell you whether the trust accomplishes that or not. We end up often getting into the conversation that isn't just throw me in as your successor trustee. It's does this accomplish what you want? And then we get to have some of those kind of moral questions, around, is this too much for my kid? Right? I've had that asked a lot. Is this too much? And then they're going, well, we have you distributing all income, but is that good? Right? Well, it depends how much income it is. And it depends if I, as a trustee, can shift the assets in the investment portfolio to increase or reduce the income that it produces if you want all income distributed.
Right.
And so then I like getting into those conversations that are a little bit more around how much is too much, how much is enough, right? This is the first time I've encountered it, but a new client who's put me in their estate plan where I actually think they're leaving too little to their kids. They're leaving a massive, it's going to be an incredible private foundation that'll continue to do really great work. But I almost think they're leaving too little because you want that safety net and those unaccounted for potential disasters. Doesn't mean you have to distribute it all, but having the possibility of stepping in to support a beneficiary in a disastrous situation. It might be a health crisis. It might be, unknowns that we can't actually think about that might happen in the next 30 or 40 years. So the moral question in there is, I always say there's the words that we have to follow. Then there's, that question of wishes and what do we rely on in that space? Recorded meetings that we had, notes from meetings with the settlers and grantors. But then there's that space that might be a step too far in saying, well, I think this is what they would have wanted. And I have a couple co-trustee relationships where I have to pull the co-trustee back in, who was the family friend, not the professional, and say, just because you think that's what they wanted isn't quite what we get to do. But this moral question, I think I put it into the conversation a lot without addressing it as that specifically, but the conversation around how much is too much, how much is enough, how do we help your kids be capable, independent adults in the world with this trust in existence? And it's different for each person. And I love that engagement in that space. But then you always have to be clear that, ethics kind of black and white, at least professionally.
Mhm.
Morals aren't as black and white for people's different faith experience.
Right.
They can be a little more subjective. And so we as trustees always have to step very carefully if we're getting into the subjective space.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, that's a great note to end on. So, Kiah, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. We got to explore a lot of very deep issues, and I think people will find this very, very beneficial. Every once in a while, I have a guest who I'll recommend to the viewers. Watch this a second time because I think you will get as much out of it through re-watching it as you do, just going through it once. There's a lot packed in here. So thanks so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you. And your questions are wonderful and thought provoking for me to reflect on them as well and deepen my own process in those. So thank you.
Great. You're welcome. So I'm going to have you sit tight for just a minute while I wrap up, and then we can talk offline for a moment. So for those of you who joined us live, thank you so much. It's always great to know that there's people out there watching us, and I appreciate it. So coming up this week, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And my topic is Learn from Defeat. And I'm going to be dealing with the disaster that was Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor Day is coming up in 5 days. So in recognition of that terrible event, I'm going to be using that as the backdrop to look at some lessons we can learn for our business and professional lives. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m. is my show, People Making Money. And I'm going to be talking about advanced goal setting. So many of you probably have heard about so-called SMART goals, and those are fine. But what I found over the years of goal setting is we need to go deeper than that and really figure out how to set goals that will really support what we want in life. And then this week on Thursday at 5 p.m. is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place. And I'm going to be talking about the pursuit of beauty while we have a cocktail, a cocktail I made up called the Blossom Elixir. So I'll show you how to mix that up, and then we'll sit back and relax as we always do every other Thursday afternoon and talk about all those things in life that have nothing really to do with our professional and business lives, but really enrich us in so many ways. Not unlike what Kiah was talking about, the moral dimensions of the work that we do. I think it makes our work so much more fulfilling because we can really engage with our clients on a very, very deep level and give them some sense of peace with what's happening. So thank you again very much for joining us today. One last thank you, Kiah, to you. And signing off, as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my bell. Courage.